Good afternoon. I'm Officer Bill Hummel, spokesperson for the Aurora Police Department. We're here today to brief you on an officer-involved shooting that occurred early this morning in our city. Joining me today is Chief Nicholas Metz. He's going to brief you on details involving and surrounding that incident. I want to begin by stating that information you're about to hear is preliminary in nature and is subject to change because of the ongoing nature of this investigation. Please hold your questions until the end. Chief Metz.
Thanks, Bill. Good afternoon, and first of all, thank you for coming in today, and especially under such short notice. We wanted to take this opportunity this afternoon to talk to you a little bit about an incident that occurred last night, a very serious incident in which involved officers involved in a shooting situation in which the individual who was shot has recently succumbed to his injuries. And so we want to make sure that we're being as transparent as possible and getting information out quickly about what occurred. Not to sound like a broken record, but as Officer Hummel just said, everything that we're telling you right now is preliminary in nature. And of course, it's always subject to change as the investigation continues. So we are giving you the best information that we can, and also understand there may be some information, some questions that you have that we may not be able to answer right now, but we'll do our best to get you that information as we go. Obviously, when we're talking about an officer-involved shooting, particularly one that ends up taking the life of someone in our community, it's the most serious incident that we deal with. So it's a tragedy for everyone. It's a tragic situation for our officers and their families, and of course, it's definitely a tragedy for the family of the subject who died. What we're going to do today, because we are still really in the early parts of our investigation, and we don't have all the statements yet from the witnesses, what I'm going to be doing today, and it's a little unprecedented, is I want to basically let you know what I saw and what members of my command staff saw in reviewing the body-worn camera video from last night's incident. And I think and hope that it will give you some context about what occurred last night. So let me just start off by saying that around a little bit before 12:30 this morning, actually, officers were investigating an incident, and in the middle of investigating that incident, they heard several shots fired a few blocks away. They went to that area, and that area turned out to be in the 8900 block of East Colfax, right next to the Biltmore Hotel, and it was there where they found a number of shell casings that were on the ground. They also had an opportunity to talk to a witness or even a possible victim of that situation, who on body camera was able to provide some very detailed information to those officers about what occurred, but just as important, some real detailed specific information about what the subject was wearing and what he looked like. Just a few minutes after officers were speaking with that individual, the officers saw someone matching that description run by them. They got out of their car and began chasing that subject. And I should back up here. When we were talking to the individual on Colfax who was providing that information, he had mentioned that he and a number of other people had been menaced by this individual with a gun, and that this individual had fired some shots. And as I said before, the officers then spotted the individual running in that area, again matching the description. And as officers gave chase, they chased the man through the parking lot of the Biltmore Motel. And while they're chasing him, you can hear on the body-worn camera footage officers repeatedly telling that individual to stop and to drop his gun. The subject refused to stop and continued running, and at one point ran around the corner of another building right there near the motel. And as officers rounded the corner, they were again continuing to give verbal commands to drop the gun. They came face to face with that individual. You could hear officers again yelling, "Drop the gun," and then you heard shots fired. And then at that point in time, the individual went down on the ground. When the man was on the ground, you could hear him talking to the officers, yelling at the officers. The officers were still, even while he was on the ground, the officers were still telling him to drop the gun. They did this repeatedly, and at one point the man finally said, quote, "Gun dropped," unquote. As the officers secured that area, they immediately secured the subject, and a handgun was found right near where the subject was laying. What I thought was really interesting and actually I was very heartened by was the fact that these officers were in I guess for lack of a better term, an enforcement mode of trying to bring this person into custody. And immediately after shots were fired, the officers went from an enforcement mode to life-saving mode. They knew that this individual had been seriously injured, and the officers began rendering aid. They requested emergency medical services from Aurora Fire Department, and in fact placed a tourniquet on the man's leg in an attempt to stop bleeding. And while the officers were doing that, because of the injuries and the amount of blood loss, the officers actually themselves were exposed to blood and had to be treated for that. The subject was transported to a local hospital where he remained in serious condition for quite some time, and as we started off at the beginning of this press conference, he succumbed to his injuries this morning. The subject is an African-American adult male. We are not going to be providing his identity right now. We leave that up to the Arapahoe County Coroner's Office to do that, and so they will likely provide that information soon. As I've said earlier, the officers who were present on the scene, which are 3 officers, it was the officer who was the primary officer, the one who shot, and then the 2 other officers who were right there with him who did not shoot. All 3 were wearing body-worn cameras, and all 3 had them on, and they were appropriately utilized. So, as this continues, obviously my main responsibility right now is to ensure that we have a credible and transparent investigation. And as we move forward with this, as we moved forward with the investigation last night, we were assisted in that investigation by the Denver Police Department, as well as our own Major Crimes Unit, as well as representatives from the 18th Judicial District Attorney's Office. This is standard procedure. This is how we typically do our investigations. Every officer-involved shooting investigation is considered a criminal investigation right from the beginning. So the officers it's investigated that way, and then once that investigation is completed, we will forward that investigation to the 18th Judicial District Attorney's Office, and they will determine whether or not criminal charges are warranted on those officers that were involved. Once that review is completed, the Aurora Police Department's Force Review Board will review the incident and will make a recommendation to me for final disposition. If the case is determined to be within policy, the case will be closed. If there is determined to be any violation of any policy, then at that point the case will be forwarded to our internal affairs for further investigation. Again, I want to just reiterate again the professionalism of our officers. They were faced with a very harrowing situation. They were dealing with somebody who obviously had shown their propensity to be dangerous just minutes before, and obviously not complying with very clear officer directives to throw down the weapon and to give themselves up. So I'm very, very proud of how those officers responded, and again, even after the shooting, ensuring that they went into immediate life-saving mode and took the steps necessary to make sure that, at minimum, the man was able to make it to the hospital alive for further treatment. Just to tell you a little bit about the officers, the primary officer, who's a white male officer, he's been with the Aurora Police Department for 3 years. He was the only officer to shoot. He is 30 years of age. He has no disciplinary history, no previous officer-involved shootings. He has been placed on administrative reassignment with pay. He has an excellent reputation in his district, and just has been really representing the department well. Witness officer number 1, also a white male officer, has been with the Aurora Police Department for 3 years. He's 34 years of age. He did not shoot. No disciplinary history, also a very good reputation. Witness officer number 2, a white male, been with the Aurora Police Department for 3 years. He's 30 years of age, Just to clarify, he did not shoot, no disciplinary history, and an excellent reputation within the department. Again, I just want to remind everybody that the information that I provided today was based on what I and members of my command staff viewed on the body-worn camera footage. The investigation continues. There's still a lot of work to do. It is far from being complete, but we again wanted to make sure that we got this information out to the public as quickly as possible as to what occurred. The family of the subject has been notified. We have offered services to them up to and including assistance from our victim assistance folks who have been in direct contact with the family for the last several hours. I think with that, I will open it up to any questions you may have.
It's just me, I think.
Yep.
I think I got this. I want to make sure I say it back to you so I hear it right. Your officers were in the area on a separate investigation when they heard the shots.
Correct.
They walked over, spoke to somebody who had a description of the subject, which then they see somebody who looks like that run by.
Exactly.
That witness had told your officers this person was armed?
Correct.
Okay. And then there was a gun found at the scene. Does APD believe that is the same gun that the person was carrying? Did they see him carrying it, or they just knew from a witness saying he had it on him?
So again, I want to be very clear. We're going by what I could see on the body camera, so this isn't any other, I'm not taking in any other information. So all I can tell you from what I saw and heard was that as the officers were chasing him through the parking lot, there were repeated commands to drop the gun, as well as to stop. When he went around the corner, again, there was another command to drop the gun. Then the shots were fired. When he was down on the ground, they again gave several directives, drop the gun, and then at one point he said, gun dropped. So what we know so far is that the gun found at the scene did not belong to the officers, and again, there's a lot more investigation that's going to have to take place to confirm who actually had possession of that weapon.
Can you tell me what kind of gun it was?
I can't tell you that right now, no.
Found right by him, though?
Right in the scene.
Not somewhere else in the parking lot?
Correct.
Can you say if that gun matched the shell casings from what you found, what the officers found initially when they were arriving and spoke to a witness and
Right.
said shots had been fired?
There's still a lot of forensic work that we need to do, so it's a little too early for us to be able to provide that information to you.
And then did that subject ever fire the gun himself? Himself?
That's also part of the investigation and what we're trying to determine.
Can you say how many times he was hit?
I can't right now, no.
And can you say where he was hit?
I can't tell you that either
Okay.
right now.
What more can we, I know you can't identify the subject. Should we know anything else about him other than he's an adult male, criminal history, or any interactions with your department before?
What I can tell you is from our initial background of him, he does have an extensive state and federal criminal history, up to and including illegal possession of weapons, both on a state and federal level.
When you say state, you mean in Colorado or elsewhere?
Yes, in state, yep.
Is there any relevance with that hotel? Like, were they all there? What was going on beforehand in that lot that maybe led up to this? Any idea yet?
That's all still part of the investigation. So we still need to obviously get statements from the witnesses and so forth. So hopefully we'll be able to have those kind of questions answered for you in the next 3 days.
Okay. You said you're kind of doing this a little unprecedented style. Why? What led you to do it this way this time on this case?
Well, again, as we talked about right from the beginning, an officer-involved shooting is the most serious type of incident that we investigate, and we take it very serious. And obviously, these types of incidents create a great deal of community interest. And so we want to make sure that the public has the information. And so I made the decision today that I at least wanted to give out what information I could. And again, that information is based on what I personally, and as well as members of my command staff, viewed on the body-worn cameras.
Liz? Anything else, Chief?
Nope. Anything?
No.
Okay. Nope.
Thanks.
I think we're good. Thank you for coming down.
Super.